The music makes it seem like I'm supposed to be dancing or something, doesn't it? Good morning, everybody. I'm really happy to see so many people here in such terrible rain, and just wanted to correct international perceptions because it rains twice as much in Seoul as in London. ChatGPT said that, but you think it rains all the time in the UK. That's not true. Yesterday was about our perceptions, walking around and looking at the world that's increasingly being built around us. It was looking through eyes to see what we all thought about it, and it was also looking at the science. So yesterday was all about what's the problem that we're all here to solve and make real change. And I sensed a big consensus around that. And today really is about where do we go? What are the solutions for this? And so it seemed talking about how do we become a good ancestor might be a good way forward, because what the challenge is not what do you think and what does your friend think and what does the journalist write in an article. What I think we learned was that our challenge is about the demolition. How do you make things that society cares enough about? And that's not even society caring about it now. For a residential project here in Seoul, in 28 years, which is the average age of that residential building, what will be the climate of thought around that project? So I was trying to imagine, we started working out the 1,000-year building, and the slide got so boring and repetitive, going great, 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 great. But to get what will our great, 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 great grandchildren, people who you, in fact, your great grandchildren, not mine, people who have never been to a lecture about why a building is good, who've never read a book about why that particular building is good, but are in part of the societal atmosphere that decides whether things get repaired and adjusted or adapted or extended, but critically not demolished. And we know that this amazing, effective, get things done mindset of South Korea has been the engine of the economic growth that's been so phenomenal. But the dark side is if you make things where you prioritize only spatial efficiency and you prioritize cost at the expense of everything else. As we discussed yesterday, the challenge from an environmental point of view is off the charts. It's literally yesterday you saw the mayor of Seoul showing how big that impact was by pulling out that diagram that someone had made from the book, which was 10 meters longer than this teeny-weeny little book. So the gravity of this is massive, and it's the dirty secret in construction that society doesn't really know. And if society did, I think it would affect our passion together and the power of the societal conversation. And the classic one, and it was so fabulous yesterday to have Richard and Midori as property developers speaking about the money side, because the mindset we have, just like people think that it rains all the time in London, and it doesn't, it's the story always goes is, oh, it's just too expensive. It's just too expensive to make buildings like that. But actually, that's the same mindset that says it's too expensive to make food that isn't fast food, cheap food that's not good for our bodies. But we've had those buildings that are not good for our brains. And it was so interesting sort of trying to put a perspective on what the hell's going on factor when you look at, we could make buildings that had some nutritional value and interestingness in 1723. We could make buildings that had some engagingness in 723. We could make them in the year 23. We could make them in the year 3. We are wealthier now than any time in history. And what? We can't afford to make buildings engaging. And it's interesting, a researcher in the US, Michael Benedict, put it very well. He said, the buildings that people prize today, the ones we sigh and say we can no longer build today because they would cost too much, were not cheaper to build back then. Indeed, they were relatively more expensive to build back then. And they absorbed proportionately more of our then wealth, time, and income. What he's saying is, as a society, we choose where we spend our money. And we have got into some groupthink where we choose to think that we'll spend our money on our car or our phones. We've chosen to spend it on all these other things and not on one of the key things that is having a huge impact, as the scientists and researchers showed us yesterday, on our brains. So it's a choice we make. We didn't have roads in the past. We didn't have cranes. We didn't have lorries. We have technologies now that we didn't have in the past. Labor is more expensive now, certainly. But it's about a choice we make. And it's so expensive to make buildings that we demolish in 28 years. It's like unbelievably mad to do that, the amount of carbon. So some examples from my own studio's work were things like this grain silo in South Africa, where we were given the option to demolish it. And the city didn't perceive it as having much value in Cape Town. And this building was made from gigantic concrete tubes, and its plan was just circular, and they needed square galleries. So all the argument was, knock it down, get rid of it. But the amount of carbon in that building built a century ago seemed bonkers to knock it down. And you could say, oh, it's ugly, but it's interesting. Is it really ugly? It's engaging. And so we turned it into Africa's first major contemporary African art museum. And we took one grain of corn and we cut it out of that heart. So it wasn't a construction project, it was a destruction project and revitalization of the top parts of it. But most of our work was restoration. But restoration to not make it look new, but restoration to focus on emotion and actually make it look the age it was, which all that magnolia paint sort of denied. We also worked on a project in the UK in King's Cross where we took a pair of buildings where the trains from the north of England, where it rains less than in Seoul, came on and they would drop coal onto the carts, which the horses would bring around London, dropping the coal, which was the energy source for all the houses. And the problem was, this was all the wrong geometry for making a place that brought people together. And so we focused on trying to cherish this, but adapt it so it would have an energy that brought people together socially. And so this funny, in the center of London, little 2-story project, we added a 3rd story, and allowed those two. We found the original quarry where the stone for the roof had been quarried, and we went back to that quarry 180 years later and made a place and used that as a focuser and a sort of sense of a central point where you would meet your friend or your grandmother, but also put love into details like lift buttons that are like belly buttons and things that would be fun for children and the child in all of us. But how do we make those buildings where someone in future will feel like, I shouldn't knock it down? And there are so many examples where the past doesn't need to hold back working and creating new futures. So this is a project that was built in France, where there was an army barracks reused as a university building, where the past just adds layers of history and enriches the project. In New York, Foster and Partners took an existing building that had been planned to be extended a bit and extended it many stories. And you could say that these totally clash with each other, but actually it's wonderful. And there's the chemistry of old and new layering up and not demolishing the existing old building adds to the story. In the Czech Republic, here was a church reused as a school. And you could say, well, the school, how precious is it? But for some reason, it was perceived as not worth demolishing. That there was enough fascination, I think enough that those 4-month-old babies would have looked at rather than ignored to make it something worth working with. And even existing residential buildings in the US, the Cook-Fox architects taking it and just extending it and building it on instead of demolishing and building a new thing that might be perfect, clean lines, and yet actually, statistically, most likely be relatively boring. Mar Jansson, who's done one of the amazing walls of public life here. This is a project in the Netherlands, taking an existing warehouse and using that as a space to jump off, to reinvigorate, and not be limited by the past. I think we've spent too long just saying, here's an old building, put just a glass box, everything has to just be a glass box around history, rather than imagining the ambition that built the history and just thinking, well, how do we build off that with ambition too? And Zaha Hadid and Partners reusing a fire station in Belgium and building workspaces above. OMA in Australia extending a museum. How do we just allow these projects to be starting points for future projects? It's really worth reading, if you haven't already read, a book called How Buildings Learn, which inspires you so much as your sense of yourself putting in a layer that others will put in other layers in future, and the okayness to be a layer in the lasagna of history as things get piled up and sort of accumulated over time, and to cherish that. And this is a community hub in China, both working with an industrial structure and adding new. So there's something, Leiby is here from the Singapore Urban Renewal Authority, and we've had some really amazing conversations. And Singapore is really ambitious about how to make a city that is soulful, joyful, and they're confident even about saying love. How do we make people love places they're at? Not just say good design, but say, how do we make somewhere that people are going to love? It's a big provocation. And we had a lunch together also with the head of urban design called Fun Xiaoling. And we were talking about this epidemic of characterless that we've all experienced. And Fun Xiaoling said, Madame Fun said, buildings don't tell stories anymore. And it was just so simple that we sort of have got into a mindset of what good design is and our dogmas and thinking of it. And that sense of giving a story, whatever that story is, felt so powerful. And I've been using it ever since she said that. And I find so many people instantly just go, yes, yeah, straight away. Interpret it as you will. So my last slide really is, what are we going to do? What are the things? Because our challenge is, how do you would say, I can't predict what anyone else will think or feel now, let alone in 2 years, 3 years. 28 years, 55 years, 1,000 years ahead. But I think that the research that people like Rebecca Magin are doing, Upali and Cleo, is they're actually showing us this isn't an arbitrary thing. They're not telling us what to design, but they're telling us the kinds of things that connect, the kinds of directions, and they're giving us, it's like they're supercharging us as designers with the kinds of directions we could go off and explore. And this point about stories. As humans, it seems the more and more I'm reading and trying to understand our humanity, especially with the vast challenge of artificial intelligence, you then come back to what are we that's different than this kind of idea of perceiving ourselves as computers, and that the computers are now as good as us as computers. But those computers actually are different, and they are not storytellers, and we are storytellers. We navigate sort of all the world actually with our emotion and our stories. And so we have to build those stories in, and I know that it's doable. And the kinds of things, this is a dumb list, but it's just a kind of checklist. But first of all, it must start with a mindset of this shifting away from a prevailing attitude that me and my team have seen again and again in the last 3 decades, which is a mindset that the public are ignorant, that they don't understand, and almost validation. If people don't like you and like what you do, you must be even more right in some way. Rather than the mindset, I think my suit from yesterday said it somewhere, about public service. That how do we see ourselves as actually being public servants, and that putting ourselves below society. And how dare we think that people are ignorant, and that if only they'd been to university like we had, then they'd realize how good what we're doing is. No one's going to have come to your lecture, read your book. Everyone is intelligent, though. Almost everyone I've ever met is smart in one way or another way. And those are the people encountering what we make. And that mindset of saying, I know we have a customer who's saying, give me meeting rooms, give me a nice big lobby for my artwork, and give me boardrooms, and give me an auditorium for my lovely cherished workforce, or whatever that is. That's your customer who pays your fee. But we misunderstand our societal responsibility when we forget we have 2 clients. We have the customer client, and we have society. And we need to justify and really imagine how our other client feels, the client who isn't speaking to us. And it doesn't mean you have to speak to everybody, and you can't make everyone happy. But you can be passionate and care also 50%, just as much as you do the other client, of what are you giving? Are you a giver in what you create? And so things like how, as a mindset, can I do something that's more public? How is this generous to a 14-year-old who will never work there, who will never live there, who will just go past? And it appears from those 4-month-old babies, who you can have an argument with if you really want to, that actually the word ornament is in there somewhere. Call it visual complexity, whatever you want. But there's something in there that we have to find a way to embed in our projects. Call it detail instead. Call it manufacturing techniques, but our eyes need it. It's like the nutrition we all need in our lived experience. And Fun Xiaoling, Singapore Urban Renewal, get more stories in there, figure it out. There must be a way. What is your story as a giver when you create buildings? And let's stop this attitude of this seriousness that makes a miserable kind of self-atmosphere. We are responsible for safety. That is a massive factor. We are responsible for using money effectively and never wasting anything. We're responsible environmentally. We're responsible in so many ways. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a twinkle in your eye, a smile in your face. And I think that Richard used the word, make a place that fizzes. Like, make a place that makes some people fizz, some little thing jump in their heart. So, and finally, clue, just use some nature. It's full of visual complexity already. It's full of awe already. You don't have to do all of these, but it's another one of those kind of things that really just look at the places, listen to the places that people like, and they tend to have a bunch of these things. So today, I'm really looking forward to all the inspiring examples that you're going to hear about and futures, and then us all as ambassadors, really, of how we can make the world more joyful and engaging, more sustainable. How do we do that? That's what today's about. Thank you, everybody.